Ethan Cole never expected the crooked help wanted notice nailed to the trading post in Hollow Ridge to bring him anything but trouble. He needed a cook, someone who could boil coffee and fry bacon without setting fire to his kitchen. What climbed that frozen mountain road instead was a battered wagon carrying a woman with hollow eyes, 3 shivering children, and secrets heavy enough to bury them all. By the time Martha Hale's boots touched his porch, Ethan's quiet winter had already ended. What began as charity would become something far more dangerous and far more necessary. If you're watching from somewhere warm tonight, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels while the snow falls here in Hollow Ridge. The wind came down from the mountains like something with teeth. Ethan Cole stood on his porch, collar turned up against the cold, watching the last of November's light drain from the sky. The ranch sat in a hollow between 2 ridges, sheltered enough to survive the worst storms, but isolated enough that winter meant weeks without seeing another human face. He didn't mind. Solitude had become something more than preference. It had become protection. He pulled the notice from his coat pocket, the paper already soft from handling. The words were simple, almost embarrassingly so. Cook wanted. Hollow Ridge Ranch, wages negotiable. Inquire at trading post. He'd written it 3 weeks ago in a moment of desperation, after burning another pot of beans and staring at the charred mess with something close to defeat. Pride had kept him from posting it for 2 weeks more. Need had finally won. The trading post keeper, old Samuel Briggs, had looked at him with knowing eyes when Ethan finally nailed the notice to the board between advertisements for patent medicine and lost livestock. "You sure about this, Cole? Inviting strangers up that mountain road?" Ethan had shrugged. "Just need someone who knows the difference between cooking and creating charcoal." Samuel had studied him over wire-rimmed spectacles. Sometimes what we need and what we get are 2 different animals entirely. Now, standing in the gathering dusk, Ethan wondered if anyone would respond at all. Winter was closing its fist around the territory. Smart folks were already battened down for the season, not looking for work on an isolated ranch where the nearest neighbor was 4 miles through snow that would soon be hip-deep on a horse. The sound reached him before he saw anything, the distant creak and groan of wagon wheels struggling over frozen ground. Ethan's hand dropped instinctively to the rifle leaning against the porch rail. Visitors this late in the season meant trouble more often than not. He waited, watching the bend in the road where the pines grew thick. The wagon that emerged from the tree line looked like it was held together by prayer and stubbornness. One wheel wobbled with a rhythm that suggested imminent collapse. The canvas cover was patched in so many places it resembled a quilt more than a tarp. The mule pulling it had the resigned look of an animal that had given up hope of rest but kept walking anyway. When the wagon drew close enough, Ethan saw the driver. She was younger than he'd expected. Maybe 25, maybe 30, hard to tell with a face that had clearly forgotten how to trust good fortune. Dark hair pulled back severe and practical. Dress that might have been blue once, now faded to the color of old bruises. Her hands on the reins were red from cold, but steady. It was what sat behind her in the wagon bed that made Ethan's chest tighten. 3 children. 2 girls and a boy, ranging from maybe 4 to 9 years old, huddled together under blankets that looked thin even from a distance. They stared at him with the enormous eyes of young things that had learned wariness early. The woman pulled the mule to a halt at the base of the porch steps. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan watched her assess him the same way he was assessing her, looking for danger, for deception, for the 1,000 small signs that separated bad situations from worse ones. "You Ethan Cole?" Her voice was quiet but clear, with an accent that suggested she'd come from somewhere back east, somewhere that hadn't prepared her for Wyoming winters. "I am." "You posted notice for a cook." "I did." He paused. "Didn't expect anyone to respond this late in the season." "Desperation makes poor people foolish." She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "You still need one?" Ethan looked at the children again. The oldest girl had her arms around the younger 2, forming a shelter with her own small body. The boy's lips had a faint blue tinge that spoke of cold that had seeped in deep. "I needed a cook," he said slowly. "Not sure I needed a cook and 3 children." Something flickered across the woman's face. Not quite hope dying, but expectation confirmed. She gathered the reins, preparing to turn the wagon. Then we'll move on. There's a settlement another day west. Hold on. The words came out sharper than he'd intended. Ethan descended the steps, approaching the wagon slowly, the way he'd approach a spooked horse. Didn't say I was turning you away, just said I wasn't expecting it. The woman's hand stilled on the reins. Up close, he could see the exhaustion carved into her features like water cutting stone. Whatever had brought her up this mountain had driven her hard. What's your name? Martha Hale. She hesitated. Was Martha Hale. Widow now, these past months. The children? Mine. Sarah's 9, Clara's 6, Thomas is 4. She said their names like a litany, like proof of something that mattered. They're good children, quiet. They won't be any trouble. Ethan had spent enough years alone to recognize desperation wearing dignity as camouflage. He looked at the wagon, at the pitifully few possessions visible beneath the patched canvas, at the children who hadn't made a sound since arriving. Can you cook? Yes. Can you do it without burning down my kitchen? The faintest ghost of something that might have been humor touched her mouth. I managed to keep my own household fed for 10 years without structural fire. I believe I can manage yours. Ethan glanced back at his ranch house. It was solid, 2 stories of timber and stone that his grandfather had built to outlast generations. 4 bedrooms upstairs, most of them empty for as long as he could remember. A kitchen big enough to feed a crew of ranch hands, though he'd been the only one using it for 3 years now. Plenty of room, too much room if he was being honest. There's a room off the kitchen, he heard himself say. Small, but it's warm. Has a stovepipe running through it. You and the children can take that for now. We'll figure out better arrangements come daylight. Martha Hale stared at him like he'd spoken in a foreign language. You're offering a shelter? Inside your house? Well, I'm not putting children in the barn in November. Ethan turned back toward the porch. Get your people inside before they freeze. I'll see to your mule. He didn't wait for her response, just headed for the wagon to unhitch the animal. Behind him, he heard the creak of the wagon seat as she climbed down, heard her quiet voice urging the children to move carefully. The mule was patient while Ethan worked the harness free, too tired to be difficult. He led it toward the barn, aware of the sounds behind him, boots on wooden steps, the soft murmur of Martha's voice, a child's cough that sounded too deep for someone so small. The barn was warmer than outside, but still cold enough that his breath steamed. He got the mule settled in a stall with hay and water, then stood for a moment in the dimness, listening to the animal's steady breathing. What the hell had he just done? He'd come to Hollow Ridge to get away from people, from their expectations and judgments and endless capacity for disappointment. He'd built a life of careful solitude where the only voice he heard was his own, and the only needs he met were the livestock's. Simple, manageable, safe. Now he'd just invited 4 strangers into his house in the dead of winter. Sometimes what we need and what we get are 2 different animals entirely. Samuel's words echoed in his memory. Ethan shook his head and headed back toward the house. The kitchen was warmer than he'd left it. Martha had already stoked the fire in the stove and was standing beside it with Thomas, the youngest boy, pulled against her side. The child's face was red from the cold, but he wasn't crying, just pressed against his mother with the silent endurance of someone who'd learned that crying didn't change anything. The 2 girls stood near the door, hands clasped together, watching everything with those enormous eyes. They were thin. All of them were thin, the kind of lean that spoke of missed meals stretched across months. The room's through there. Ethan gestured toward the door on the far side of the kitchen. It's not much, but it's warm. Martha said it simply, like warmth was all that mattered. Maybe it was. Thank you, Mr. Cole. Ethan, if you're going to be cooking my meals, we can skip the formalities. He moved past them to the cupboard, pulling down what food he had readily available. Bread from town, some dried venison, a jar of preserves. It's late for a proper meal, but this will hold you until morning. He set the food on the table and stepped back, giving them space. Martha herded the children toward the chairs with practiced efficiency, settling them and dividing the food with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to make little stretch far. She broke the bread into pieces, gave each child a small portion of meat, spread the preserves thin. Ethan watched from near the stove, struck by how quickly the kitchen had gone from empty to full, from silent to alive with small sounds, The scrape of chair legs, the soft whisper of Martha's instructions, the tiny sounds of children eating with the focus of the truly hungry. When did they last eat? Martha didn't look up from portioning out the food. Yesterday morning. There was an inn in the valley, but our money... She didn't finish the sentence. Ethan moved to the cupboard again, pulling down more bread, more venison. Martha's hand shot out, catching his wrist. Her grip was stronger than expected. We don't take charity we can't repay. It's not charity. He met her eyes. They were brown, he noticed, dark and direct. You agreed to work for wages. Consider this an advance on services to be rendered. Her hand lingered a moment longer, then released. She nodded once, sharp and businesslike, then returned her attention to the children. Ethan left them to eat and went to check the room off the kitchen. It was small, as he'd said, barely 10 feet square, with a narrow bed pushed against one wall and a trunk for storage. The stovepipe from the kitchen ran through it before venting up through the roof, keeping it warmer than the rest of the house. He'd used it for storage mostly, boxes of things he couldn't quite bring himself to throw away but didn't need to look at every day. He cleared the boxes out, stacking them in the barn to deal with later, then found blankets in the upstairs linen closet. They smelled of cedar and disuse. He piled them on the bed, then stood back and assessed the space with a critical eye. It wasn't much, but it was warm and dry and safe, which was probably more than Martha Hale and her children had known for a while. When he returned to the kitchen, the children had finished eating and were leaning against each other like tired puppies. Martha had already started clearing the dishes, her movements efficient despite obvious exhaustion. Leave those. Ethan's voice was quiet. Get your people settled for the night. Morning's soon enough to start earning your keep. Martha paused, hands in the basin, then nodded. She dried her hands on a towel and gathered the children with a few soft words. Ethan stepped aside as they filed past him toward the small room, each child casting him a quick, uncertain glance. Thera, the oldest, was the last to pass. She stopped in front of him, looking up with her mother's serious eyes. Thank you for the food, Mr. Cole. Her voice was small but clear, properly polite in a way that suggested Martha had taught her manners even when there was no one to use them on. You're welcome, Sarah. The girl's eyes widened slightly, surprised he'd remembered her name. Then she hurried after her siblings. Martha was the last to enter the room. She turned in the doorway, one hand on the frame. Mr. Cole? Ethan, I know you took a risk bringing us here. I won't make you regret it. See that you don't. He kept his voice gruff, uncomfortable with gratitude. Breakfast is at dawn. Kitchen's yours to work with. Yes, sir. She started to close the door, then paused. Why did you let us in? You could have just refused at the door. Ethan thought about the question, about the cold in those children's eyes and the proud set of Martha's shoulders, and the way loneliness had become such a familiar weight he'd stopped noticing it until tonight when the house suddenly felt less empty. Because I remember what it's like to need help. The words came out rougher than intended. And because no child should sleep in a barn when there's a warm bed available. Martha held his gaze for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. Then she nodded and closed the door softly. Ethan stood in the kitchen for a while after, listening to the quiet sounds of settling, footsteps, murmured voices, the creak of the bed. Then silence. He banked the fire in the stove and checked the locks on the doors, then climbed the stairs to his own room. It was cold up here, away from the kitchen's warmth, but he'd grown used to it. He undressed in the dark and slid under quilts his grandmother had made, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring questions. Tomorrow he'd need to figure out how this arrangement would work, what the terms would be, how much he was willing to let strangers into the life he'd carefully constructed around solitude. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, the house held more than one heartbeat. And despite his better judgment, despite all his careful defenses, Ethan found something almost like comfort in that fact. The wind howled outside, throwing snow against the windows. But inside Hollow Ridge Ranch, 5 people slept warm. Winter had arrived in earnest. But this winter, Ethan Cole wouldn't face it alone. Morning came gray and cold, the kind of dawn that suggests the sun had given up trying and settled for showing the outlines of things without bothering with color. Ethan woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment, still caught in the fog between sleep and waking, he thought he'd imagined the previous night. Then he heard movement downstairs, the quiet clank of the stove being fed, the soft scrape of a pot on iron. He dressed quickly, the cold air of his room biting at exposed skin, and descended the stairs. The kitchen was transformed, not in any dramatic way. The furniture was all the same, the walls still bare of anything but function, but in the small details that spoke of habitation. The stove was hot and radiating warmth. Coffee steamed in his battered pot. The table had been wiped clean, and Martha Hale stood at the counter, slicing bread with the careful precision of someone who'd done it 10,000 times before. She glanced up when he entered, her face composed but wary. "Good morning. I hope I didn't wake you." "No." Ethan moved to the stove, grateful for the heat. "Coffee smells good. There's bacon frying, eggs if you want them. I found stores in your pantry. I hope you don't mind that I inventoried what you have. I'll need to know what's available if I'm to plan meals properly." There was something almost defensive in the way she said it, like she expected him to object to her presence in his spaces. Ethan poured himself coffee and considered his response. "Kitchen's yours to manage however you see fit. Same with the pantry and the root cellar. Just let me know when supplies run low." He sipped the coffee. It was strong and hot, and better than anything he'd managed to make himself. "Where are the children?" "Still sleeping. They were exhausted." Martha turned the bacon with a fork. "I thought I'd let them rest a bit longer. The warmth and full bellies will have helped, but they've been cold for a while now." Ethan heard what she didn't say, that her children had been cold and hungry long enough for it to become their normal state. He leaned against the counter, cradling his coffee, studying her profile in the morning light. She was pretty, he supposed, in a worn sort of way. Not the delicate prettiness of town girls who never had to work, but the kind that came from good bones and determined survival. Her hair was already neatly pinned, her dress, still that faded blue, clean despite its age. There was a quietness about her that felt deliberate, like she'd learned to make herself small in hopes of avoiding notice. "You said you were widowed." Her hand stilled briefly on the fork. "Yes. My husband died 4 months ago. Accident at the mill where he worked." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." The words were flat, without inflection. Then, as if realizing how that sounded, she added, "It was quick. He didn't suffer." Oh, Ethan recognized the lie. Not about the death itself, but about the grief surrounding it, or the lack thereof. Martha Hale spoke about her dead husband the way someone might mention the weather, factually, necessarily, without emotion. Interesting. "How'd you end up in Wyoming?" "We lived in Ohio. After he died, there were debts. The house, it wasn't ours anymore. I had family in Montana, an aunt who wrote saying there was work if I could get there." She transferred the bacon to a plate with movements that were just a shade too careful. "We made it as far as Hollow Ridge before winter caught us. The wagon's in bad shape, and Thomas caught a fever in the valley. We needed to stop. Then I saw your notice." "The aunt in Montana know you're not coming?" "She'll figure it out when I don't arrive." Martha cracked eggs into the pan, 3 of them, more than Ethan usually bothered with. "I'll write when I can." The eggs sizzled in the bacon grease. Ethan watched her work, noting the economy of her movements, the way she kept the stove at exactly the right temperature, the practiced efficiency that spoke of years of managing a household. "You'll need wages," he said finally. "I can pay $10 a month plus room and board for you and the children. That's fair for a ranch this size." Martha glanced at him sharply. "That's more than fair. Most places would offer 7, maybe 8. Most places don't have 3 extra mouths to feed." Ethan set his empty cup down. "And I figure good cooking's worth paying for, especially if it means I can actually eat my own meals without risking death." The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "I accept your terms." "Good." He moved toward the door to check the stock. "I'll be working around the property most mornings. Winter's here. That means checking on the cattle, making sure water sources aren't frozen, keeping the barn maintained. You'll have the house to yourself mostly." "And the children?" "They can help you if they're able. Otherwise, keep them warm and fed. That's enough." He was reaching for his coat when Martha spoke again, her voice quiet but firm. "Mr. Cole? Ethan, I need to know something." He turned back, waiting. "If someone comes looking for us, if anyone asks—" She met his eyes directly. "I need to know if you'll tell them we're here." The kitchen seemed very still suddenly. Outside a crow called, harsh and lonely. Ethan studied Martha's face, seeing the fear she was trying to hide beneath practicality. "Someone likely to come looking?" "I don't know." The honesty in those words was raw. "But if they do, if anyone comes asking about a woman and 3 children, I haven't seen them." Ethan pulled his coat on, his voice matter of fact. "As far as anyone in town needs to know, I hired a widow named Martha Hale who answered my notice. Nobody's business beyond that." The tension in Martha's shoulders eased fractionally. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Winter up here is long and hard, and we're stuck with each other until spring." Gratitude might not survive the experience, but he said it without heat, almost with humor. When he stepped outside, the cold hit him like a fist. Snow had fallen during the night, a few inches of fresh powder covering the existing pack. The sky was the color of old pewter, promising more to come. He could see his breath, could feel the bite of wind that said winter was just getting started. The barn was warmer than outside, but still cold enough that the livestock's breath steamed. He checked on the mule first. The animal seemed content enough, munching hay with the resignation of something that knew its traveling days were over for the season. The 2 milk cows and the handful of cattle he kept close to the house for winter were all accounted for, healthy and calm. He was mucking out stalls when he heard the barn door creak open. Sarah, the oldest girl, stood in the doorway, bundled in a coat that was too thin for the weather, but cleaner than he'd expected. "Mama said to ask if you need anything brought from the house." Ethan leaned on the pitchfork, studying her. In daylight, he could see she had her mother's serious eyes and dark hair, but there was something else in her face, too. A watchfulness that seemed too old for 9 years. "Your mama let you come out here alone?" "She's watching from the window." Sarah pointed back toward the house, where, sure enough, Ethan could see Martha's silhouette in the kitchen. "She said I should be useful if I'm to earn my keep." "You're 9. Your job is to be 9, not to earn anything." The girl blinked at him, clearly confused by this concept. "But Mama works, so I should work too." Ethan sighed and set the pitchfork aside. "Tell you what, you can help me gather eggs from the chicken coop if you want. That'd be useful without being too heavy for someone your size." Sarah's face brightened, the first real expression he'd seen from her beyond wariness. "I'm good at gathering eggs. I did it at home before—" She stopped abruptly, the brightness dimming. "Before you lost your home," Ethan finished gently. "I know, your mama told me about your father." The girl looked down at her boots. "Mama said we don't talk about him." "Then we won't." He gestured toward the coop built onto the side of the barn. "Come on, those hens won't wait all day." They worked in companionable silence, Sarah proving she did indeed know how to gather eggs without breaking them. The chickens clucked and fussed, disturbed by the cold and the intrusion, but Sarah moved among them with confidence. "Mr. Cole?" Her voice was small. "Is it true you'll let us stay all winter?" "That's what I told your mama." Even though we're extra trouble?" Ethan looked at her, this thin child with 2 serious eyes who thought her existence was an imposition on the world. Something in his chest tightened uncomfortably. "You're not trouble, Sarah. You're people. People who needed help, that's all." She considered this solemnly, then nodded as if filing the information away for later examination. They finished gathering the eggs and returned to the warmth of the barn. "You can head back to the house now," Ethan said. "Tell your mama I'll be in for lunch around noon." Sarah clutched the egg basket carefully and started toward the door. Then she turned back. "Mr. Cole, at our old house, my father used to get angry a lot. About small things, broken plates or crying or—" She took a breath. "Will you get angry if we break things or make noise?" The question hit Ethan harder than it should have. He crouched down to Sarah's level, meeting her eyes directly. "Sarah, listen to me. I don't get angry over broken plates or children being children. Accidents happen. This is a working ranch. Things break all the time. What matters is that you're safe and warm and fed. Understand? She studied his face like she was trying to decide whether to believe him. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay. She left then, trudging through the snow back toward the house, the egg basket held carefully in front of her. Ethan watched until she reached the door and Martha pulled her inside. Then he returned to his work with a strange weight in his chest. The day passed in the steady rhythm of ranch work, feeding livestock, checking fences, splitting wood for the stove. The sky stayed gray and threatening, but the snow held off. By noon, when Ethan returned to the house, wonderful smells filled the kitchen. Martha had made soup, real soup, thick with vegetables and chunks of salt pork, with fresh bread to soak it up. The children sat at the table eating quietly, their movements still cautious but less afraid than the night before. Thomas, the youngest, had color back in his cheeks. "This is good," Ethan said after his first spoonful. It was more than good. It was the kind of meal that reminded him there was more to eating than just fuel. "Thank you." Martha refilled his bowl without being asked. "Sarah said she helped you with the eggs." "She did. Good helper." Sarah ducked her head, but Ethan caught the small smile on her face. The meal continued in relative quiet, not the heavy silence of discomfort, but the easier quiet of people too busy eating to talk. Clara, the middle child, kept sneaking glances at Ethan like she was trying to figure him out. Thomas focused entirely on his soup with the intense concentration of the very young. After lunch, Ethan returned outside to continue his work. The afternoon grew colder, the wind picking up from the north. By the time evening came, bringing an early darkness, the first flakes of new snow were beginning to fall. He secured the barn and made his way back to the house through the gathering storm. Light glowed in the windows, warm, golden, welcoming. He could hear voices inside, muffled but present. When he stepped through the door, stamping snow from his boots, he found the children sitting near the stove with Martha. She was mending something, a shirt by the look of it, working by lamplight. Sarah had a slate and was practicing letters. Clara was playing quietly with a cornhusk doll, and Thomas had fallen asleep against his mother's side. They all looked up when he entered, but this time the wariness was less pronounced. Martha even offered him a small nod that might have been greeting. "Supper's ready when you are," she said. "Just stew tonight with biscuits." "Sounds fine." He washed up at the basin and joined them at the table. The stew was as good as lunch had been, rich and warm, and exactly what a man needed after a day working in the cold. They ate together, this strange temporary family, while outside the snow fell heavier and the wind howled down from the mountains. After supper, Martha put the children to bed in the small room, her voice a low murmur through the walls. Ethan sat by the stove, reading a week-old newspaper from town, aware of the sounds of domestic life happening around him. Water being heated for dishes, the soft tread of Martha's feet on the wooden floor, the crackle of the fire. When she emerged from settling the children, she moved to the sink to finish the washing up. Ethan lowered his paper, watching her work. "They're settling in," he observed. "Children are resilient, more than adults sometimes." Martha scrubbed a pot with focused attention. "They were worried you'd send us away." "I'm not in the habit of throwing people out into blizzards." "Some men would have." She set the clean pot aside to dry. "Some men wouldn't have let us in at all." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They stayed that way for a while, him reading, her working, until the dishes were done and the kitchen was clean. "I should turn in," Martha said finally. "Morning comes early." "It does." Ethan set his paper aside. "Martha, if you need anything, any supplies for the children or yourself, make a list. I'll pick things up next time I'm in town." She paused at the door to her room, hand on the frame. "I will." "And Ethan? Thank you for today. For all of it. You cooked 3 meals and kept the house warm. Seems to me I should be thanking you." Something that might have been humor touched her eyes. "Then we're even." She disappeared into her room, closing the door softly. Ethan sat by the stove a while longer, listening to the storm outside and the quiet breathing of the house around him. He'd been alone for 3 years. In one day, that had changed completely. He should probably feel unsettled. Instead, banking the fire and climbing the stairs to his cold room, Ethan felt something that might have been relief. The house had people in it again. The kitchen had warmth beyond just the stove. And for better or worse, winter had brought him something besides just cold and silence. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would be questions from town eventually, gossip about the widow and her children who'd appeared at Hollow Ridge. There would be adjustments as they learned to live in proximity, as the children grew more comfortable and Martha's careful guard perhaps lowered. But tonight, 5 people slept warm and fed while the storm raged outside. And sometimes, Ethan thought as sleep finally took him, that was enough. The first week passed in a rhythm that surprised Ethan with its ease. Martha rose before dawn each morning, had coffee ready by the time he came downstairs, and managed the kitchen with quiet efficiency that required no supervision. The children grew less skittish, their movements through the house becoming more natural, less like trespassers waiting to be discovered. On the 8th morning, Ethan woke to silence. It was wrong immediately. No smell of coffee, no soft sounds of the stove being stoked, no murmur of Martha's voice settling the children for the day. He dressed quickly and descended to find the kitchen cold, the stove banked but not lit, and Martha's door still closed. He hesitated, uncertain of protocol. Privacy mattered, especially for a woman alone with her children, but worry overrode courtesy. He knocked softly. "Martha?" A pause, then her voice, strained and hoarse. "Just a moment." When the door opened, she looked terrible. Her face was flushed with fever, her eyes glassy and unfocused. She swayed slightly in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame for support. "I'm sorry," she said, the words tumbling out too fast. "I'll get breakfast started right away. You need to get back in that bed." Ethan caught her elbow as she swayed again. "How long have you been sick?" "It's nothing, just a cold." But her teeth were chattering despite the flush of fever. The children need their mother not to collapse." He guided her firmly back toward the bed. Behind her, he could see the 3 small forms huddled together under blankets, Sarah's wide eyes watching. "How are they feeling?" "They're fine. It's just me." Martha tried to pull away from his grip, but she had no strength behind it. "Please, I can work. I just need a moment to—" "Martha." He made his voice stern enough to cut through the fever fog. "Get back in that bed. That's not a request." She stared at him, something flickering in her expression, fear maybe, or the kind of panic that came from knowing you couldn't afford to be weak. Then the strength went out of her and she sank onto the edge of the bed, shoulders slumping in defeat. "I can't be sick," she whispered. "You'll send us away." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He crouched down so they were at eye level. "I'm not sending anyone away because of a fever. You're sick. That happens. Rest, get better, and we'll manage fine until you do. But breakfast? I've been making my own breakfast for 3 years. I think I can handle it for a few more days." He pulled the blankets up around her shoulders. "Sleep. Doctor's orders." "You're not a doctor." "No, but I'm the one paying your wages, which means you have to listen to me." He said it gently, trying to inject some humor into her obvious distress. "Consider it part of your employment terms." Martha's eyes drifted closed, exhaustion and fever pulling her under. "The children? I'll look after them." Ethan straightened, addressing Sarah, who was still watching with those serious eyes. "Your mama's sick. You 3 are going to help me today. Think you can do that?" Sarah nodded solemnly, already sliding out from under the blankets. "What do you need us to do?" "First, let your mama sleep. Come on, we'll get the kitchen warm and figure out breakfast." He herded the 3 children out of the room, closing the door softly behind them. In the kitchen, he stoked the stove back to life while Sarah gathered her siblings near the warmth. Clara looked worried, her small face pinched with concern. Thomas was quiet, thumb in his mouth, watching Ethan with uncertain eyes. "Is Mama going to die?" Clara's voice was very small. "No." Ethan said it firmly, with confidence he hoped was justified. "She has a fever and she needs rest, that's all. People get sick sometimes, especially in winter. She'll be better in a few days." "Our papa got sick," Thomas mumbled around his thumb. "Then he died." Ethan paused in his work at the stove, struck again by these children who'd learned too young that bad things happened without warning. He turned to face them, leaning against the counter. "I'm sorry about your papa. That must have been very hard." He chose his words carefully. But your mama has a different kind of sick. Just a winter cold, not the kind that makes people die. You promise? Clara's eyes were huge in her thin face. Ethan thought about all the ways the world could break promises, all the guarantees that meant nothing in the face of genuine hardship. But these children needed certainty more than philosophical truth. I promise. Your mama's going to be fine. Some of the tension left Clara's shoulders. Sarah, the oldest, still looked skeptical but said nothing. She'd learned early not to trust easy assurances. All right. Ethan turned back to the stove with more confidence than he felt. Who knows how to make coffee? Sarah raised her hand tentatively. Mama taught me. Good. You're in charge of coffee. Clara, can you set the table? He pulled out the bread Martha had made yesterday. Thomas, your job is to not get underfoot. Think you can handle that? The boy nodded seriously, settling himself on the floor near the stove where the warmth was strongest. They worked together with less grace than Martha would have managed, but more cooperation than Ethan expected. Sarah proved competent with the coffee, measuring grounds with careful precision. Clara set out plates and cups, her movements slow but deliberate. Ethan managed to fry bacon without burning it, though the eggs were less successful, broken yolks and uneven cooking that produced something edible, if not appetizing. They ate in relative silence, the children still subdued by worry over their mother. Ethan found himself studying them, noting details he'd missed before. Clara had a small scar on her chin. Thomas's left boot was worn nearly through at the toe. Sarah had bitten her nails down to the quick. After breakfast, he said, pushing his plate away. Sarah, I want you to check on your mama every hour. Make sure she's still breathing steady, that the fever hasn't gotten worse. If anything seems wrong, you come get me immediately. Understand? Yes, sir. Clara, you'll help me with the chickens and the barn work. Thomas, you stay inside where it's warm. Can you do that? The boy nodded, still sucking his thumb. They spent the morning in a strange new rhythm. Ethan found himself constantly aware of the house behind him as he worked, listening for sounds of distress. Clara proved to be a steady helper despite her small size, following instructions without complaint and asking occasional questions in her quiet voice. Mr. Cole? She was scattering feed for the chickens, her breath steaming in the cold air. When Mama gets better, will we have to leave? Why would you leave? Because we're trouble. She said it matter-of-factly, like stating a known truth. Papa always said we were more trouble than we were worth. Ethan stopped what he was doing, turning to face her fully. Clara, look at me. She did, her small face serious and sad. Your papa was wrong. You're not trouble. None of you are. He crouched down to her level. You're children. Children need care and food and warmth. That's not trouble. That's just what children need. And your mama works hard to provide for you. That makes you a family worth having around. Understand? Clara's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them back fiercely. Mama says we're not supposed to cry. Your mama's wrong about that too. Ethan's voice was gentle. Crying's just feelings coming out. Nothing wrong with that. A single tear tracked down Clara's cold, reddened cheek. I'm scared Mama's going to die and leave us alone. She's not going to die. Ethan pulled out his handkerchief and handed it to her. I know you're scared. That's all right. But your Mama's strong, and she's going to be fine. I promise you that. Clara wiped her face with the handkerchief, then clutched it in her small fist like a talisman. Can I keep this? Just until Mama's better? You can keep it as long as you need it. They finished the morning work in silence, but it felt less heavy than before. When they returned to the house for lunch, Sarah reported that Martha was sleeping, her breathing steady, but her fever still high. Ethan made soup, or tried to. The result was edible, but far from Martha's standard. The children ate without complaint, though he noticed them exchanging glances that suggested they were being polite about the quality. It's not as good as Mama's, Thomas announced with the brutal honesty of the very young. Thomas, Sarah hissed. It's fine. Ethan actually smiled. He's right. Your Mama's a much better cook than I am, one of many reasons I hired her. After lunch, while the children played quietly near the stove, Ethan slipped into Martha's room to check on her himself. She was deeply asleep, her face flushed and damp with fever sweat. He touched her forehead, hot, but not dangerously so. Her breathing was steady, if a bit labored. He found himself studying her sleeping face, noting the lines of strain even fever and exhaustion couldn't erase. She looked younger asleep, less guarded, but also more fragile. Whatever had driven her up that mountain road to his door, it had cost her something deep. On impulse, he checked the trunk in the corner, the one piece of furniture that was clearly theirs. It wasn't locked. Inside, he found the expected things: a few changes of clothing for the children, all worn and carefully mended, a woman's nightgown, a hairbrush, a small Bible, and at the bottom, wrapped in a piece of cloth, a bundle of letters tied with string. Ethan didn't touch the letters, but he could see the top one was addressed to Martha in an unfamiliar hand. The postmark was from Montana, the aunt she'd mentioned, probably. He closed the trunk carefully, feeling like an intruder, and left the room. The afternoon passed slowly. Ethan tried to maintain normal work routines while keeping half his attention on the house. Sarah checked on her mother regularly, reporting each time with the same solemn message: still sleeping, still feverish, still breathing fine. By evening, when he came in from checking the livestock one final time, he found the children gathered around Martha's door, talking in urgent whispers. Sarah looked up when he entered, her face pale. "She's awake, but she's not making sense. She keeps saying someone's coming, that we have to hide." Ethan moved past them into the small room. Martha was sitting up in bed, the blankets clutched around her, her eyes wild and unfocused. She didn't seem to see him at first. "They'll find us," she was saying, voice hoarse and desperate. "I shouldn't have stopped. We should have kept going. He'll send someone. He always said he would." "Martha." Ethan kept his voice calm and steady. "You're safe. You're at Hollow Ridge. It's just fever talking." She turned toward him, but her eyes looked through him rather than at him. "You don't understand. He said if I ever left, if I ever took them away—" Her voice broke. "The letters. I shouldn't have kept the letters. He'll know where we went." "Martha, listen to me." Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, catching her hands in his. They were burning hot. "No one's coming. You're safe here. The children are safe. But promise—" The word came out like a child's plea. "Promise they can't find us." "I promise." He said it firmly, meaning it, even though he didn't fully understand what he was promising to protect them from. "Now lie back down. You need to rest." She let him guide her back to the pillow, but her hands clutched at his sleeve. "Don't let him take them. Please. Whatever happens to me, don't let him take my children." "No one's taking anyone." Ethan smoothed the blankets around her. "Sleep now. I'll watch over things." Martha's eyes drifted closed, but her grip on his sleeve didn't loosen. "He hit them," she whispered. "Thomas mostly, because he cried, but all of them sometimes. I couldn't stop him. I tried, but—" "Martha, sleep." Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. "We'll talk about this when you're better." Her grip finally loosened, and she slipped back into restless sleep. Ethan stayed for a moment, his mind racing. The pieces were coming together now. The way the children flinched at sudden movements, Sarah's question about anger over broken things, Martha's fear of being sent away for any perceived failing. Her husband hadn't died in a mill accident, or if he had, it hadn't been the tragedy she'd implied. When Ethan emerged from the room, 3 pairs of eyes watched him anxiously. He closed the door softly and crouched down to their level. "Your mama's going to be fine. The fever's making her confused, that's all. By tomorrow she'll be better." "She said someone's coming." Sarah's voice was flat. "She's right, isn't she? Someone is coming." Ethan studied the girl's face, too old, too knowing. "Is there someone who might come looking for you?" Sarah glanced at her younger siblings, then back at Ethan. "Mama said we don't talk about it. She said if we talk about it, bad things happen. Sarah, I need to know if there's danger coming to this house." "Basin." The girl's face struggled with conflict, the desire to obey her mother's rules warring with the need for protection. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Our papa had a brother, Uncle James. When Papa died, Uncle James said we should come live with him. Mama said no, that we were leaving. Uncle James said he had rights, that families should stay together." She swallowed hard. "He told Mama if she ran away he'd find us. He said blood was blood and we belonged with him. And your mama didn't want to go with him? Sarah shook her head violently. Uncle James was like Papa, mean when he drank. Mama heard him tell someone he'd make her sorry for refusing him, that he'd teach her proper respect. Her voice dropped even lower. The night before we left, someone threw a rock through our window. There was a note tied to it. Mama burned it, but I saw what it said. You can't hide from family. Ethan felt cold that had nothing to do with winter. Does this uncle know where your aunt in Montana lives? I don't know, maybe. Sarah looked miserable. Are we in trouble? Did we bring trouble to you? No. Ethan said it firmly. You didn't bring trouble. Trouble was already following you. But you're safe here. I won't let anyone take you or your mother anywhere you don't want to go. Understand? How? Clara's small voice piped up. Uncle James is big, bigger than you, and mean. I don't have to be bigger or meaner. I just have to be here. On my land, protecting people under my roof. Ethan straightened. This is my ranch. That makes you my responsibility, and I take care of what's mine. The children looked at him with varying expressions of hope and doubt. Thomas, who'd been quiet through the whole exchange, suddenly left his sisters and wrapped his arms around Ethan's leg. Don't let the bad man get us, he mumbled into Ethan's pants. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, some long, dormant, protective instinct roaring to life. He picked the boy up, surprised by how light he was, and met Sarah and Clara's eyes over his head. I won't. That's a promise. That night, Ethan didn't sleep well. He lay in his cold room, listening to the house breathe around him, and thought about a woman who'd fled across territory with 3 children to escape a man's notion of family rights. Thought about children who'd learned to be quiet so they wouldn't anger the adults who should have protected them. Thought about the promises he'd made without fully understanding what they might cost. Around midnight, he heard movement downstairs. He rose and descended to find Sarah in the kitchen, checking on her mother through the cracked door. Couldn't sleep? He asked quietly. Sarah jumped, then shook her head. I wanted to make sure Mama was still breathing. She is. I checked an hour ago. Ethan moved to the stove, stirring the banked coals back to life. But since we're both awake, you want some warm milk? We don't have milk. We do, actually. Got 2 cows in the barn. I've been too lazy to milk them properly, but I know how. He fetched milk from the cold pantry and heated it in a pan, adding a touch of honey he'd been hoarding. Sarah sat at the table, watching him work with those serious eyes. You really won't let Uncle James take us? I really won't. Even though we're not your family? Ethan poured the warm milk into 2 cups and sat down across from her. Sarah, family isn't just blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up when you need them, or the people you choose to protect. Your mama chose to come here and I chose to let you stay. That makes us something, even if we don't have a name for it yet. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup, considering this. At home, at our old home, Papa used to say blood was everything. That family meant you did what you were told or there were consequences. Your papa was wrong about a lot of things, sounds like. Are you married, Mr. Cole? The question caught him off guard. I was. A long time ago. What happened? She died. Fever, like what your mama has, but worse. This was before I came to Wyoming. The words came easier than expected, maybe because it was dark and Sarah was just a child who needed to understand that loss was survivable. Her name was Elizabeth. We'd only been married 2 years. Did you love her? I did. Do you still? Ethan considered the question, thinking about Elizabeth's face, now more memory than reality. I'll always care about who she was, but the sharp hurt of losing her, that faded. Time does that. Makes even big pain get smaller. How long does it take? Depends on the pain and the person, but it happens eventually if you let it. Sarah sipped her milk, her expression thoughtful. Mama cried the night Papa died, but not the way people cry when they're sad. More like when you're scared and relieved at the same time. Does that make her bad? No. Ethan's voice was firm. That makes her honest. Not all deaths are tragedies, Sarah. Sometimes death is just the end of something that should have ended sooner. The girl absorbed this with a slow nod. They finished their milk in companionable silence. Then Ethan sent her back to bed with instructions to wake him if anything changed with Martha. He stayed up a while longer, watching the banked fire and thinking about the small family sleeping under his roof. 3 children who'd learned fear before they learned safety. A woman who'd chosen desperate flight over the alternative, and somewhere out there, possibly, a man who believed blood gave him rights over people who wanted nothing to do with him. Let him come, Ethan thought grimly. Let him try. Hollow Ridge was isolated, easy to defend if it came to that, and Ethan had learned long ago that sometimes the most important battles weren't about winning, they were about making the cost of attacking higher than anyone wanted to pay. He climbed back to his room as false dawn began to gray the windows. Tomorrow, he'd need to check supplies, make sure they could weather a long winter if they needed to. He'd need to keep Martha's fever from worsening, keep the children fed and warm and as unafraid as possible. But tonight, for now, they were all safe. The house was warm, the doors were locked, and anyone who wanted to harm the people under his roof would have to go through him first. That was a comfort, at least. And sometimes comfort was all you could offer in the face of an uncertain world. Morning arrived with the kind of silence that meant heavy snow had fallen during the night. Ethan woke to find the world transformed, everything buried under a fresh blanket of white that turned the ranch into something from a winter painting. Beautiful, but treacherous. The kind of snow that could trap you for weeks if you weren't prepared. He dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Sarah already in the kitchen, standing watch over her mother's door with the dedication of a sentry. How is she? The fever broke about an hour ago. Sarah's voice held cautious relief. She's sleeping better now, not talking about scary things anymore. Ethan felt tension he hadn't known he was carrying ease from his shoulders. That's good. That's real good. He moved to stoke the fire. You get any sleep at all? Some. Sarah rubbed her eyes. Clara wet the bed. She hasn't done that since we left Ohio. I think she's more scared than she's letting on. Being scared's nothing to be ashamed of. Ethan got the coffee started, movements automatic now after days of practice. Where's Clara now? Back to sleep with Thomas. They're both exhausted. Sarah moved to the window, looking out at the snow. That's a lot of white. 2 feet, maybe more. We're snowed in for a while. Ethan joined her at the window. Good thing your mama got here when she did. Another week, and that road would have been impassable. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then asked, Do you think Uncle James knows where we are? I don't know, but even if he does, he can't get here in this snow. Nobody can. We've got time to figure things out. The girl nodded slowly, still watching the snow fall. Mama says running away is cowardly, that good people stand and face their problems. Your mama's wrong about that too. Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. Sometimes running is the bravest thing you can do, especially when staying means letting someone hurt you or your children. That's not cowardice, that's survival. Uncle James would say we're his blood, that we owe him loyalty. Blood doesn't entitle anyone to hurt you, and loyalty goes both ways. It has to be earned, not demanded. Ethan turned to face her fully. Sarah, I need you to understand something. Whatever your mama's been telling you about shame or running or owing people, she's been trying to protect you the only way she knew how. But you don't owe that man anything. Not you, not your brother and sister, and not your mama. Understand? Sarah studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. I'll try to understand. That's all I'm asking. They made breakfast together. Sarah was getting better with the coffee, and Ethan managed eggs that were only slightly rubbery. When Clara and Thomas emerged, sleepy and rumpled, they ate in the warm kitchen while snow continued to pile up outside. Around mid-morning, Martha finally woke properly. Ethan heard her voice through the door, weak but lucid, talking quietly with Sarah. He gave them privacy, busying himself with indoor chores that didn't really need doing until Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway. Mama wants to see you. Ethan entered the small room to find Martha sitting up in bed, pillows propped behind her. She looked terrible, pale and drawn, with dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze was clear and focused. I'm sorry, she said immediately, for being a burden, for not being able to work. Stop. Ethan pulled the room's single chair closer to the bed. You had a fever. That happens. Nobody's keeping score. Martha's hands twisted in the blanket. Sarah said I was talking about things I shouldn't have, things we agreed not to discuss. You had a high fever. People say all sorts of things when they're delirious. But you heard, didn't you? She met his eyes, her expression somewhere between defiant and terrified. About my husband. About why we're really running. Ethan was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Sarah told me some things. About your husband's brother. About him wanting to take you and the children. Martha's face went white. She shouldn't have told you that. I told them never to speak of it. She told me because she was scared for you. And because I asked. Ethan kept his voice calm. Martha, if there's someone who might come looking for you, I need to know. This is my home. I have a right to know what threats might be headed toward it. Then send us away. The words came out flat. As soon as the snow clears enough to travel, we'll go. I won't bring trouble to your door. I'm not sending you anywhere. I'm asking you to trust me enough to tell me the truth. Martha looked away, her jaw tight. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant murmur of the children in the kitchen. Then, slowly, she began to speak. My husband's name was Daniel. We married young. I was 17, he was 22. My parents approved the match. He had steady work, came from a good family. Everything seemed... She paused, searching for words. Everything seemed right. But it wasn't. No. The word was barely a whisper. He was charming when he courted me. Attentive, kind. But after we married, things changed. Small things at first. Criticism about how I kept house, complaints about meals. Then it got worse. He'd lose his temper over nothing, break things, push me. Eventually the pushing became hitting. Ethan felt his hands curl into fists. He forced them to relax, staying quiet so she could continue. I thought about leaving, but where would I go? My parents had passed by then. I had no money of my own, and the children kept coming. Sarah, then Clara, then Thomas. Each one made leaving harder. Martha's voice was steady, but her hands shook. I told myself it wasn't that bad, that other women had worse, that if I just tried harder, did better, he'd stop. He didn't stop. He never stopped. He just got more careful about where he left marks. She touched her ribs unconsciously. The children learned to be quiet, to stay out of his way when he'd been drinking. Sarah especially, she became so good at reading his moods, at keeping her siblings safe. What happened 4 months ago? Martha's laugh was bitter. He fell at the mill where he worked, 3 stories onto concrete. The foreman said it was an accident, that Daniel had been careless near the edge. But I knew... She stopped, swallowing hard. I knew he'd been drinking. He always drank. It was only a matter of time before it killed him. And his brother? James? Martha's voice went flat. James was worse than Daniel in some ways. Meaner, more deliberate. Daniel hit when he was angry. James hit because he enjoyed it. She looked at Ethan directly. After Daniel died, James came to the house, said as Daniel's brother he had rights to his family, that I was too weak to care for the children alone, that they needed a man's guidance. He wanted to marry you. He wanted to own me, own us. Martha's hands clenched in the blanket. I refused. He said I didn't have a choice, that the law would support him. When I still refused, he started showing up at the house, making threats. One night, someone threw a rock through the window with a note saying I couldn't hide from family. So you ran. I took what little money Daniel had left, packed what we could carry, and left in the middle of the night. My aunt in Montana had written saying there was work out west, that she'd help if we could get there. I thought if we could just make it that far, we'd be safe. Did you tell your aunt about James? Martha shook her head. I was ashamed. Ashamed I'd stayed with Daniel so long. Ashamed I'd let it happen to my children. I just wanted to start over somewhere clean, where nobody knew us. And then winter caught you. And then I saw your notice. Martha's voice cracked slightly. I thought maybe it was a sign, that we were supposed to stop here, that maybe we'd found somewhere safe enough. She looked at him with desperate eyes. But I've put you in danger. James is persistent. If he tracked us this far, let him come. Ethan's voice was hard. This is my land, my house, and you're under my protection. That means something out here. You don't understand. James doesn't care about law or rights or anything civilized. He takes what he wants and hurts anyone who tries to stop him. Then he'll learn that some people hurt back. Ethan leaned forward. Martha, listen to me. I've been alone for 3 years because it was easier than dealing with people. Easier than risking getting hurt again. But you and your children showed up needing help, and I gave it because it was the right thing to do. That doesn't change because the situation's more complicated than I thought. Why? The question came out raw. Why would you risk yourself for strangers? Ethan thought about that. About Elizabeth dying while he was away working. About coming home to an empty house and a grief that had nearly destroyed him. About choosing isolation because it felt safer than connection. About 3 children with frightened eyes and a woman with more courage than she gave herself credit for. Because nobody should have to face the world alone, he said finally. And because those children deserve better than running and hiding and being afraid all the time. If I can give them that, even just for a winter, then that means something. Martha's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to repay that kind of kindness. You already are. You're cooking, caring for your children, keeping this house running. That's more than enough. He stood. Now rest. Get your strength back. We'll worry about James if and when he shows up. And if he does? Then we'll deal with it. Together. Ethan moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Stop teaching your children that running is shameful. What you did, leaving a bad situation to protect them, that took more courage than most people ever need. They should know that. He left before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him. In the kitchen, 3 pairs of eyes watched him anxiously. Mama's going to be fine, he told them. She just needs rest and food. Sarah, think you can make soup? There's vegetables in the root cellar and salt pork in the cold pantry. I can try. Good. Clara, Thomas, you help her. I need to check on the livestock before the snow gets any deeper. Outside, the world was muffled and strange. Snow still fell in thick flakes, accumulating faster than Ethan had seen in years. The wind had died down, leaving everything eerily quiet. His boots punched through the soft top layer into harder pack beneath, making each step an effort. The barn was cold but dry, the animals restless from being confined. He checked each one, making sure they had food and water, talking to them in the low voice his grandfather had taught him to use with livestock. The routine work helped settle his thoughts, gave him space to process everything Martha had told him. A man who beat his wife and children, a brother who thought he had rights to them, and Martha, desperate enough to run rather than fight, wise enough to know that fighting someone like James wouldn't end well for her or her children. Ethan had spent 3 years avoiding exactly this kind of complication, and now here he was, standing in a freezing barn, planning how to defend people he'd known less than 2 weeks against a threat that might or might not ever arrive. He should feel trapped. Instead, he felt something closer to purpose. The storm lasted 3 days. Snow piled up past the windows on the north side of the house, creating drifts that reached the eaves. The world contracted to the warm sphere of the ranch house, the barn barely visible through the blowing white. They fell into a different rhythm during those days. Martha, recovering slowly, directed the children in helping with household tasks from her bed. Sarah proved surprisingly capable in the kitchen, following her mother's instructions to produce meals that were simple but good. Clara helped with washing and mending. Even Thomas, at 4 years old, had jobs he could manage, fetching wood from the pile by the door, setting the table, keeping the water bucket filled. Ethan found himself spending more time inside than usual, the storm making outdoor work dangerous. He sat by the stove whittling small figures from scrap wood while the children played quiet games, made repairs to harness and tools that he'd been putting off. Read aloud from the few books he owned, adventure stories mostly, that made Thomas's eyes go wide and brought something almost like smiles to the girls' faces. On the 3rd evening, when the wind finally died and the snow stopped falling, Martha emerged from her room properly for the first time. She was still pale and weak, but steady on her feet. She stood in the kitchen doorway, taking in the scene. Ethan reading by lamplight, the 3 children arranged around him, the warm glow of the stove, the clean surfaces and organized spaces. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for keeping them safe while I couldn't." Ethan looked up from his book. "They're good children. Made it easy. They like you. Martha moved slowly to the table, sinking into a chair with visible relief. That's rare. They don't trust easily. Can't imagine why. The dry comment made Martha's mouth quirk in something almost like humor. Sarah told me what you said, about running, not being cowardly. I meant it. I know. Martha was quiet for a moment, watching her children. I spent so long telling them to be strong, to endure, to not complain. I thought I was teaching them resilience, but maybe I was just teaching them to accept suffering. You were doing the best you could with what you had. Ethan closed the book. That's all any parent can do. Is it enough? Ask me in 20 years when they're grown and making their own choices. That's when you'll really know. Martha smiled properly then, tired and sad, but genuine. You're a good man, Ethan Cole. Better than you probably realize. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded and returned to his book. But something warm had settled in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to belonging. That night, after the children were asleep, Ethan and Martha sat at the kitchen table with coffee, talking quietly while the house settled around them. What will you do when spring comes? He asked. Martha cradled her cup, staring into the dark liquid. I don't know. The wagon won't make it much farther. One wheel's nearly gone, and the axle's cracked. Even if we could repair it, traveling with 3 children in spring mud, she shook her head. But I can't stay here forever. You hired me for winter. When the snow clears, you'll want your privacy back. Maybe. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Or maybe I'll discover I like having people around, having the house feel lived in instead of just occupied. You're offering us permanent shelter? I'm saying we don't need to make decisions about spring while we're still buried in winter. He met her eyes across the table. One season at a time, Martha. That's all we can manage anyway. She nodded slowly, something like relief crossing her features. One season at a time. They sat in companionable silence after that. 2 people who'd found something unexpected in each other's company. Not quite friendship yet, but the foundation it might grow from. Outside, the storm-cleared sky revealed more stars than seemed possible, cold and bright and infinite. Inside, the house was warm, and for now, that was enough. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Ethan woke before dawn and spent an hour digging paths through the snow, to the barn, to the woodpile, to the root cellar. His breath steamed in the frozen air, and his muscles burned from the effort, but the work felt good, purposeful. He was carrying an armload of split wood back to the house when he noticed the tracks. They came from the road, or where the road should be under all that snow, and led straight toward the barn. Not animal tracks, boot prints. Someone had been here during the night, walking the perimeter of the property, checking the buildings. Ethan's blood went cold. He dropped the wood and followed the tracks, noting how they circled the barn, approached the house from multiple angles, then retreated back toward the road. Someone had been scouting, learning the layout, looking for, what? Weaknesses? Ways in? The tracks were old, filled partially with wind-blown snow but still visible, made sometime during or just after the storm, which meant whoever made them had been traveling in conditions that could kill a man, pressing forward despite the danger. Someone determined, someone who wouldn't let weather stop them. Ethan followed the tracks as far as the tree line, where they disappeared into deeper snow and dense pines. He stood there for a long moment, scanning the forest, seeing nothing but winter stillness. But the feeling of being watched crawled up his spine anyway. When he returned to the house, Martha took one look at his face and went pale. What happened? Someone was here, last night, or maybe during the storm, just looking, far as I can tell, but it's him. Martha's voice was flat with certainty. It's James. He found us. You can't know that. I know. She moved to the window, looking out at the white expanse. I know because I've been waiting for it. Because men like James don't let go once they decide something belongs to them. Ethan watched her rigid posture, saw the fear she was trying to control. Even if it is him, he can't do anything. Not with this much snow, not on my land. The law doesn't matter to him. Martha turned from the window. You need to send us away, before he comes back. before someone gets hurt because of us. No. Ethan, no. He said it more firmly. We're not making decisions based on fear and maybes. Someone was here, yes, but we don't know who or why. And even if it was this James, even if he comes back, that doesn't change anything. You're staying. The children are staying. And if he shows up, we'll deal with it then. You don't understand what he's capable of? Then help me understand. Ethan moved closer, because right now, all I see is a woman who's so used to running that she can't imagine standing still might work better. Martha stared at him, anger and fear and something else warring in her expression. You think I'm a coward? I think you're terrified. There's a difference. His voice gentled. But you're not alone anymore, Martha. That changes the equation. Does it? Or does it just mean more people get hurt when he comes? That's my risk to take. This is my home, my choice. Ethan held her gaze. I'm not letting him chase you away, not without a fight. And if fighting him gets you killed, then at least I'll die for something that matters instead of just slowly fading away alone. The words came out more raw than he'd intended. 3 years I've been hiding up here, Martha. Hiding from grief, from connection, from anything that might hurt. You think I don't know what it's like to run? I've been running since the day Elizabeth died. Just in place instead of across territory. Martha's expression shifted, surprise replacing some of the fear. That's different. You lost someone you loved, and you lost years of your life to a man who hurt you. Lost your home, your sense of safety, maybe even who you were before him. Don't tell me that's not grief worth running from. He took a breath, steadying himself. But at some point, running stops being escape and starts being the only thing you know how to do. I'm done running. Question is, are you? The kitchen was silent except for the crackle of the fire. Through the walls, they could hear the children stirring, waking to a new day. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, the sounds of life continuing despite fear. Finally, Martha spoke, her voice barely audible. I don't know how to stop. Neither do I, but maybe we figure it out together. She nodded slowly, tears tracking down her cheeks that she didn't bother to wipe away. If he comes, if James comes and you're hurt because of us, I'll never forgive myself. Then we'll make sure that doesn't happen. Ethan moved to the door. I'm going to check those tracks more carefully, see if I can tell which direction he went. You keep the children inside today. Don't let them go to the barn or anywhere outside your sight. Understand? Yes. And Martha, load the rifle I keep behind the door just in case. Her eyes widened. I don't know how to shoot. Sarah probably does. If her father hunted, he'd have taught the oldest to handle a gun. He pulled on his coat. Ask her, and if anyone comes to this house, anyone you don't know, you don't open that door. You hear me? Martha nodded, fear bright in her eyes, but determination there too. Be careful. Always am. Ethan spent the next 2 hours following those tracks, studying them, trying to read the story they told. The man who made them was tall, longer stride than Ethan's own, and heavy, judging by how deep they sank, even in packed snow. He'd approached from the east, which meant he'd likely come up the valley road despite the storm. That took either desperation or determination, or both. The tracks circled back into the forest eventually, heading northeast toward the pass. Ethan followed until they became too difficult to trace, then stood in the silence of the trees, listening. Nothing. Just wind through pines and the occasional crack of ice-laden branches. But the feeling of being watched remained. He returned to the house to find Sarah teaching her mother how to load and aim the old Winchester. The girl's movements were confident, practiced, and Ethan felt another surge of anger at a man who'd taught his 9-year-old daughter to handle deadly weapons, but not how to feel safe in her own home. Good, he said, making them both jump. Keep it close. I don't think anyone's coming today, but better prepared than sorry. The day passed in tense awareness. Ethan worked close to the house, never out of sight of the windows. The children played quietly inside, sensing the adults' nervousness, even if they didn't fully understand it. Martha prepared meals with mechanical efficiency, her eyes constantly flicking to the windows, to the doors, to the rifle now leaning against the wall within reach. Evening came without incident. Ethan made one more circuit of the property as darkness fell, checking for new tracks, new signs of disturbance. He found nothing, but that didn't ease his mind. Absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence. Someone had been here. Someone might come back. That night, he didn't go upstairs to his cold room. Instead, he made up a bedroll near the stove, positioned where he could watch both doors. Martha didn't question it, just nodded understanding and herded her children to their room. Before she closed the door, though, she paused and looked back at him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not running either." Then she was gone, door closing softly, leaving Ethan alone in the darkened kitchen with his thoughts and the Winchester across his knees. The house settled into nighttime quiet, the tick of cooling wood, the whisper of wind outside, the barely audible breathing of sleeping children. Ethan sat in the darkness, watching shadows and listening to silence, and waited. Let James come. Let him try to take what wasn't his. He'd learned that some houses didn't give up their people without a fight. And Ethan Cole, who'd spent 3 years hiding from life, discovered he was more than ready to fight for what mattered. Morning would bring its own answers. But tonight, he stood watch, and everyone under his roof slept safe. That was worth something, maybe everything. The stranger came 3 days later, just after noon when the sun was high and deceptively warm against the snow. Ethan was splitting wood behind the house when he heard the sound. Hoofbeats, slow and deliberate, coming up the road that wasn't really a road anymore under all that white. He set down the axe and moved to where he could see without being seen. A single rider on a big bay horse, picking his way carefully through the drifts. The man was large, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat and a hat pulled low. Even from a distance, there was something aggressive in the way he sat his horse, like he owned whatever space he occupied. Ethan's gut tightened. He circled back to the house through the barn, entering through the kitchen door. Martha took one look at his face and went white. "He's here. Someone's here. Stay inside with the children. Lock the door behind me." "Ethan, lock the door, Martha." He took the Winchester from where it leaned against the wall, checked the load, then met her frightened eyes. "I mean it. Whatever happens, you keep those children inside and that door locked. Understand?" She nodded, already moving toward the children's room. Ethan heard her urgent whisper, heard the rustle of movement as she gathered them. Then he stepped back outside, closing the door firmly behind him, hearing the bolt slide home. The rider had reached the yard by then, stopping his horse about 20 feet from the porch. Up close, he was even bigger than Ethan had thought, easily 6'3", heavily muscled, with a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't set in lines of habitual cruelty. His eyes were pale blue, cold as the winter sky, and they swept over the property with the assessing gaze of someone cataloging assets. "Help you?" Ethan kept his voice level, the rifle held casually, but ready. "I'm looking for my family." The man's voice was deep, cultured even, which somehow made it worse. "My brother's widow and her children. Woman named Martha Hale. 3 young ones with her. You seen them?" "Can't say I have." Ethan didn't move from the porch. "This is private property. State your business or move on." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Private property, that's interesting, because I happen to know my sister-in-law was headed this direction, and there aren't many places to stop between the valley and the pass." "Then maybe she kept going. Montana's still a ways north." "Maybe." The pale eyes fixed on Ethan with uncomfortable intensity. "Or maybe she's here. Maybe some good Samaritan took her in, didn't know she was running from family obligations." "Family obligations?" Ethan let the words hang in the cold air. "That what you call it?" Something shifted in the man's expression, a flash of anger quickly controlled. "I call it caring for blood. My brother died, left a widow and 3 children. As his only living relative, it's my duty to provide for them. Make sure they're properly cared for." "And if the widow doesn't want your care?" "She doesn't know what she wants. Grief makes people confused, makes them run when they should stay. I'm just trying to bring my family home." He dismounted with surprising grace for such a large man, moving a step closer. "Now I'm going to ask you one more time, nice and friendly-like. Have you seen Martha Hale and her children?" Ethan raised the Winchester slightly, not pointing it, but making its presence clear. "And I'm going to tell you one more time. This is my land. Anyone on it is here by my invitation. and I don't recall inviting you." The man stopped, his smile hardening into something uglier. "You're making a mistake, friend. This is family business. You don't want to get involved. Already involved the moment you rode onto my property uninvited. Is that right?" The man took another step forward, deliberately testing boundaries. "You know who I am?" "Don't care who you are." "James Hale. Maybe Martha mentioned me, her dead husband's brother?" Another step. "The one who has legal rights to those children. The one who could make a lot of trouble for anyone harboring them against family wishes." Legal rights. Ethan's voice went flat. "That's interesting, because last I checked, a man's brother doesn't automatically get custody of his children, especially when their mother's still alive and perfectly capable. A woman alone can't properly raise 3 children. They need a man's guidance, a firm hand." James's smile returned, colder than before. "I'm sure a judge would agree with me, especially if that woman's been deemed unstable. Running away like she did, taking the children in the middle of the night, could argue she's not fit." "You could argue a lot of things. Doesn't make them true. Truth's what people believe, not what actually happened." James stopped about 10 feet from the porch, close enough that Ethan could see the calculation in his eyes. "Here's what I believe. I believe my sister-in-law is scared and confused. I believe she ran because she didn't understand I was only trying to help. And I believe whoever's hiding her doesn't know what he's getting into." "Then let me educate you on what you're getting into." Ethan's voice stayed calm, but steel ran through it. "You're standing on my land, making threats, implying you have some kind of claim on people I've never met. Now you can turn that horse around and ride back the way you came. Or you can keep pushing, and we'll see how well legal rights hold up when you're trespassing with hostile intent." James studied him for a long moment, weighing options. Then he laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You're either very brave or very stupid. I haven't decided which. Don't much care what you decide, long as you decide to leave." "Oh, I'll leave, for now." James moved back toward his horse with deliberate slowness. "But this isn't over. Those children are my blood. That woman owes me, and I always collect what's owed." He mounted with easy competence, settling into the saddle and gathering the reins. But before turning the horse, he looked back at the house, his gaze lingering on the windows. "You tell Martha I'll be back. Tell her she can run all she wants, but family always finds family, and tell her I'm a patient man. I can wait out winter. But when spring comes and the roads open," he smiled that cold smile again. "Well, we'll see how brave her protector is when he doesn't have snow as a fortress. I'll tell her you stopped by, and that you're not welcome back." James's eyes hardened. "You're making an enemy you don't want, friend. Better that than being the kind of man who lets bullies take what isn't theirs." For a moment, something dangerous flickered across James's face, rage barely controlled, violence held in check only by calculation. Then he touched his hat in a mocking salute and turned his horse. "See you in spring, friend. We'll continue this conversation then." He rode away at a deliberate pace, not hurrying, making it clear he was leaving by choice, not compulsion. Ethan watched until horse and rider disappeared into the trees, then waited longer still, making sure he was truly gone. Only when he was certain did he turn back to the house. The door opened before he could knock, Martha standing there with the rifle in her hands and terror written across her face. Was it him? It was him! Ethan stepped inside, bolting the door behind him. The children huddled near the stove, Sarah holding her siblings close, all 3 sets of eyes enormous with fear. "What did he say?" Martha's voice shook. "What did he want?" "He wanted me to tell you he knows where you are, that he'll wait until spring, that he always collects what's owed." Ethan set the Winchester down, then turned to face her fully. "He thinks those children are his property, that you're somehow obligated to him because of blood. He'll come back." It wasn't a question. "When the snow melts, he'll come back with the law or with men or with whatever he needs to take us." "Let him try." "Ethan, you don't understand. James doesn't make threats he can't back up. If he says he'll come in spring, he will, and he'll bring enough force to make sure he wins." "Then we'll be ready." Ethan moved to the stove, needing something to do with his hands. "But that's months away. A lot can happen in months." "Like what?" Martha's laugh was bitter. "Winter ends, spring comes, And we're right back where we started, running or fighting a battle we can't win. Ethan looked at the children, at their frightened faces and hunched shoulders, looked at Martha with her white knuckles around the rifle, looked at the warm kitchen that had become something like home over the past weeks. Or we make sure when spring comes, you're not as defenseless as James thinks you are. Martha stared at him. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we use winter. We prepare, we make plans, and we make damn sure that when James comes back, if he comes back, he finds something very different from what he's expecting. How? Ethan was quiet for a moment, an idea forming that was either brilliant or completely insane. By making sure his legal claim doesn't hold water, by making sure you're not a helpless widow, he can bully with threats of judges and custody. I don't follow. Marry me. The words fell into the kitchen like stones into still water. Martha's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The children stared. Even the fire seemed to pause in its crackling. What? Marry me. Ethan said it steadier now, the idea solidifying as he spoke. James's whole argument is that you're an unfit mother, a woman alone who can't properly care for 3 children. But if you're married to a landowner with a stable home and income, his argument falls apart. You're not alone anymore. The children have a father figure. Everything he plans to use against you becomes irrelevant. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. He moved closer, speaking earnestly. Look, I know this isn't romance. It's not what either of us would choose under normal circumstances. But it solves the problem. It gives you legal protection. Makes the children legally mine as much as yours, which means James can't touch them. And it's a lot harder to claim a married woman is unstable than a widow running away with her children. Martha shook her head slowly. You can't want to marry me. You don't even know me. I know you're a good mother. I know you're brave enough to leave everything familiar to protect your children. I know you're a hard worker and you make excellent coffee. He tried for humor, fell short. I know that in the few weeks you've been here, this house has felt more like a home than it has since Elizabeth died. That's not nothing. And what about you? What do you get out of this arrangement besides trouble with James and 3 children who aren't yours? I get to not be alone anymore. I get to help someone who needs it. And I get to stand up to a bully who thinks violence and blood give him rights over people. Ethan held her gaze. That's enough for me. Martha looked at her children, Sarah watching with fierce intelligence, Clara with confused hope, Thomas with the simple trust of the very young. I won't trap you into this. Won't let you sacrifice yourself for us. I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm making a choice, a practical one that happens to benefit everyone involved. He softened his voice. Martha, I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to pretend to. I'm just asking you to let me help. To let this be a partnership instead of charity. You keep house and cook and manage the children. I keep the ranch running and provide shelter and protection. We face James, and whatever else comes, as a united front instead of you alone. The children should have a say. Ethan addressed them directly. Sarah, Clara, Thomas, your mama and I are talking about getting married, not because we're in love like in stories, but because it would help keep you safe. Make it so that man can't take you away from your mama. What do you think about that? Sarah spoke first, her voice small but certain. Would we get to stay here, even after winter? If that's what you wanted, yes. And the bad man, Uncle James, he couldn't make us go with him? He'd have a much harder time. I'd be your legal stepfather. That gives me rights to protect you. Clara piped up. Would you be our papa? Ethan felt something catch in his chest. I'd be your stepfather. That's a little different. Your real papa, whatever he was like, will always be your real papa. I'd just be, someone else who cares about you. If you'd let me. Thomas, who rarely spoke, surprised them all. Will you be mean like Papa was? The question hung in the air, weighted with history and fear. Ethan crouched down to the boy's level. No, Thomas, I promise you that. I get frustrated sometimes, and I'm not always patient, and I'm sure I'll make mistakes. But I will never ever hit you or your sisters, or your mama. That's a promise I'll keep for as long as I live. The boy studied his face with those 2 old eyes, then slowly nodded. Okay. Clara looked at her mother. Mama, can we stay, please? Martha's face crumpled slightly, tears tracking down her cheeks. I don't know, baby. This is a big thing Mr. Cole is offering. I need to think. What's to think about? Sarah's voice was sharp, practical. We stay. We're safe. We leave. Uncle James finds us. Seems pretty clear to me. Sarah, no, Mama. You're always saying we have to be practical. This is practical. The girl looked at Ethan. You really mean it? You'd marry Mama to help us? I really mean it. And you wouldn't expect her to... Sarah's face colored slightly, adult concerns in a child's voice. You wouldn't expect things a husband usually expects? Ethan understood what she wasn't quite asking. This would be a marriage in name and law only. Your Mama would have her room, I'd have mine. Nothing would change except the legal protection. I give you my word on that. Sarah looked at her mother. Then I think we should say yes. You're 9 years old. You can't make this decision. But you can, and you're going to say no because you think it's too much to ask, or because you're afraid of owing someone, or because you think we're not worth the trouble. Sarah's voice broke slightly. But we are worth it, Mama. You're worth it. And if Mr. Cole is offering help, maybe we should take it instead of being proud and ending up back where we started. Martha stared at her eldest daughter, surprise and something like pride warring in her expression. Then she looked at Ethan, really looked at him, searching for something in his face. Why are you really doing this? Tell me the truth. Ethan thought about that, about the real reasons under the practical ones. Because I'm tired of being half alive. Because you and your children reminded me what it feels like to be needed. And because when James rode up to my house and threatened people under my protection, something in me woke up that's been asleep for 3 years. Something that says some things are worth fighting for, even if they're not mine by blood. We'd just be another obligation, another weight. Or you'd be a reason to get up in the morning that's bigger than just surviving another day. He stepped closer. Martha, I'm not promising this will be easy. I'm not promising perfect happiness, or that I'll never make you angry, or that we won't have hard times. But I am promising that if you say yes, you'll never have to face James alone. You'll never have to run again unless you choose to. And those children will have a home that's stable and safe for as long as they need it. Martha looked at her children again, at their hopeful, frightened, needing faces, looked at the warm kitchen around them, at the house that had been shelter against more than just winter, looked at Ethan, this quiet man who'd taken them in when he had every reason to turn them away. If we do this, she said slowly, we do it right, legal and proper, with a preacher if we can get one up here, or at least witnesses and papers. I won't have James claiming it's not legitimate. Agreed. And you really don't expect, you won't expect me to be a wife in all the ways. I expect you to be yourself, whatever that means. Ethan kept his voice gentle. We'll figure the rest out as we go. And if you meet someone else, if you fall in love with someone who isn't tied down with 3 children and a past full of violence, then we'll deal with that if it happens. But Martha, I'm 34 years old. I've loved and lost once. I'm not holding my breath for lightning to strike twice. She was quiet for so long that Ethan thought she might refuse. Then, finally, she nodded once, sharp and decisive. All right, yes, I'll marry you, for the children's sake and for practical protection. But I want you to know I may never love you the way a wife should love a husband. I may never love you that way either. But I already respect you, already care about what happens to you and your children. Maybe that's enough to build something on. Maybe. Martha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When? Soon as we can arrange it. Once the storm breaks and the roads are passable enough for a ride to town, I'll get the preacher up here. Or we go down if that's easier. Either way, before spring, before James can make his move. Sarah stepped forward suddenly, looking between them with those 2 serious eyes. Thank you, Mr. Cole, for helping us, for giving us a chance. You can call me Ethan now, or Pa, if you're comfortable with that. Whatever feels right. The girl considered this, then nodded. Ethan, then. For now. Clara and Thomas moved closer, too, and suddenly Ethan found himself surrounded by 3 small people who smelled of soap and childhood and hope. Martha watched from across the kitchen, her expression complex and unreadable. I'll hold you to those promises, she said quietly. About not hitting, about keeping us safe, about being better than the men I've known. Good. Hold me to them, and if I ever break them, you have my permission to take that rifle and run as far and fast as you need to. Something that might have been the ghost of a real smile touched Martha's mouth. Deal. That night, after the children were asleep, Ethan and Martha sat at the kitchen table working out the practical details of their arrangement. Money and property rights, and how they'd manage the household. It was businesslike, almost formal, two people negotiating terms of a contract rather than planning a life together. But somewhere in the middle of discussing crop rotation and livestock management, Martha's hand found his across the table. She didn't say anything, just let her fingers rest against his for a moment. A brief connection, an acknowledgement of trust given and received. Then she pulled away, stood, and went to her room without looking back. But that one touch said more than words could have. Said she was willing to try. Said she believed him, at least enough to take this leap. Said that maybe, just maybe, they could build something real from this practical arrangement. Ethan sat in the darkness long after she'd gone, listening to the house breathe around him. 5 people under one roof, bound together now by more than just circumstance. By choice and promise, and the determination to stand against whatever came. James would come back in spring, that was certain. But when he did, he wouldn't find a frightened widow and helpless children. He'd find a family, unconventional and born of necessity, but a family nonetheless. One that had all winter to become something strong enough to stand against his threats. Outside, the stars were hard and bright in the frozen sky. Inside, the fire burned warm and steady, and for the first time since Elizabeth died, Ethan Cole felt like he might be building towards something instead of just hiding from the past. It wasn't love. Not yet, maybe not ever, but it was something solid and real and worth protecting. And sometimes that was more than enough. The wedding happened on a Tuesday in late January, when the sun was strong enough to melt ice from the eaves, but not warm enough to threaten the snowpack. Ethan had ridden down to Hollow Ridge the week before, breaking trail through drifts that sometimes reached his horse's chest to fetch Reverend Michaels and secure the necessary papers. The Reverend was a practical man who'd spent 20 years marrying miners and ranchers and asking fewer questions than most clergy might. When Ethan explained the situation, widow with 3 children, need for legal protection, marriage of convenience, Michaels had simply nodded and said he'd seen stranger arrangements work out better than love matches. The Lord works in mysterious ways, he'd said, packing his Bible and his warmest coat, and sometimes practical protection is its own kind of grace. So now they stood in the kitchen that had become the heart of their temporary household, with Sarah and Clara and Thomas as witnesses, and the Reverend's voice filling the room with words about marriage and commitment until death do us part. Martha wore her best dress, still the faded blue, but clean and pressed, and Ethan had shaved and put on a shirt that wasn't patched at the elbows. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. Do you, Ethan Cole, take Martha Hale to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward? Ethan looked at Martha's face, pale and serious, her eyes holding questions she wasn't asking aloud, and thought about all the ways this was insane and all the ways it made perfect sense. I do. And do you, Martha Hale, take Ethan Cole to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward? Martha's voice when she spoke was quiet but steady. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. The Reverend closed his Bible with a soft thump. You may kiss your bride, if you're so inclined. Ethan and Martha looked at each other, both clearly uncertain about this particular tradition given their arrangement. Then Martha stepped forward, rose on her toes, and pressed a brief chaste kiss to his cheek. Thank you, she whispered, so quiet only he could hear, for giving us this chance. Thank me by not making me regret it, he replied, trying for humor and finding something closer to sincerity instead. The children clapped, Clara with enthusiasm, Thomas copying his sister, Sarah, with the measured restraint of someone who understood the seriousness of what had just happened. The Reverend poured them each a small glass of whiskey he'd brought, adding apple cider to the children's portions, and they toasted to new beginnings and winter's end and whatever else seemed appropriate. After the Reverend left, paid in cash and a promise of fresh beef come spring, the newly formed family stood in the kitchen in awkward silence. They were legally bound now, a family in the eyes of law and church, but nothing had actually changed. The same people in the same house, with the same fears waiting beyond the walls. "Well," Martha said finally, "I suppose I should make dinner. Being married doesn't excuse us from needing to eat." "I'll help," Claire volunteered immediately. "Me too," Thomas added. Soon the kitchen filled with the familiar sounds of meal preparation, and the strangeness of the day began to fade into routine. Ethan found himself watching them work. Martha's efficient movements, Clara's careful concentration, Thomas's 4-year-old attempts to help that were more hindrance than aid, and felt something settle in his chest that might have been contentment. Sarah joined him by the window, looking out at the snow-covered world beyond. "Are you scared?" she asked quietly. "Of Uncle James coming back?" "Little bit," Ethan admitted. "But mostly I'm just determined. There's a difference. What if he brings the law? What if he has papers that say he has rights to us? Then we show them our papers. Show them you have a home and a mother and now a stepfather who can provide for you. Show them you're safe and cared for and want to stay." He looked down at her serious face. "Law's supposed to protect children, Sarah, not put them in harm's way. If James comes with papers, we'll fight with papers of our own. But we'll fight. And if that doesn't work, then we'll figure something else out. That's what families do. They solve problems together." Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'm glad Mama married you, even if it's just pretend." "It's not pretend. It's just different from what marriages usually are." Ethan touched her shoulder briefly. "And for what it's worth, I'm glad too. You're good kids. Worth protecting." The girl's eyes filled with tears. She blinked back fiercely. "Our papa never said things like that." "Then your papa was a fool." They ate dinner as a family for the first time as actual family, legally bound now, not just circumstance. The conversation was careful, everyone feeling their way through this new dynamic, but it was there, real and tentative and somehow right. That night, Martha knocked on Ethan's door after the children were asleep. He'd moved back upstairs after the wedding, giving the family their space, but now she stood in his doorway looking uncertain. "Can we talk?" "Of course." He gestured to the chair by the window. "Everything all right?" "I wanted to make sure we're clear on expectations, now that we're actually married." Martha sat, her hands folded in her lap. "You said this was in name only, but I need to know you meant it, that you won't change your mind once the papers are signed, and I'm legally yours." "Martha, you're not mine. That's not how I see this." Ethan leaned against the dresser. "The marriage gives you legal protection and gives me the right to defend you and the children. That's all. Your room is yours. Your choices are yours. Nothing changes except what we show the world. And if people talk, if they assume things about our marriage that aren't true, let them assume. What happens in this house is our business, not theirs." She nodded slowly, some tension easing from her shoulders. "I know I'm not what you would have chosen. If circumstances were different, if this was a real marriage. Circumstances are never what we'd choose. We just deal with what we get." He moved to sit in the other chair. "For what it's worth, if I had to choose someone to face down winter and threats and uncertainty with, I'd choose someone exactly like you. Practical, brave, good with children, makes excellent coffee. That's a pretty solid foundation." Martha's mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. "You have low standards if good coffee rates that high. You've clearly never had my coffee. Good coffee is a gift from above." She actually laughed at that, brief and surprised. Then her expression sobered. "When spring comes, when James comes back, it's going to get ugly. You know that, right? He won't just accept defeat. He'll fight and scheme and do whatever he can to take us. Then we'll fight harder, scheme better, and make damn sure he understands that some battles aren't worth winning." Ethan held her gaze. "I meant what I said, Martha. Those children are under my protection now, legally and otherwise. James will have to go through me to get to them, and I promise you I won't make it easy. You could get hurt. He's dangerous when he doesn't get what he wants. So am I. He just doesn't know it yet." Martha studied his face, seeing something there that made her nod. "All right, then we prepare. We make sure when he comes, we're ready. Exactly. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Ethan, thank you for all of this. For not being the kind of man who'd take advantage. For being someone we can trust. Plus, thank you for letting me be part of something bigger than just surviving alone. After she left, Ethan sat in the darkness of his room, thinking about the day, about the strange family he'd acquired, about the threat waiting somewhere beyond the snow. He should feel trapped. Instead, he felt purposeful in a way he hadn't since Elizabeth died. The weeks that followed fell into new patterns. Martha and Ethan moved through the house like partners in a careful dance, negotiating space and routine and the 1,000 small adjustments that came with legal binding. The children grew more confident, their laughter coming easier, their movements less cautious. Sarah started helping Ethan with the heavier chores, proving surprisingly strong for her size. Clara became Martha's shadow in the kitchen, learning recipes and techniques with fierce concentration. Thomas, still so young, simply absorbed the peace of a house without violence, his nightmares becoming less frequent. February arrived with bitter cold and clear skies. The snow stopped falling but stayed deep, turning the world into a frozen sculpture of white and shadow. Ethan used the time to teach the children things they'd need: how to read weather, how to handle livestock, how to shoot straight if it came to that. Why do we need to know this? Clara asked one afternoon while learning to load the Winchester. Because knowledge is protection, Ethan explained. The more you know how to do, the less you need to depend on anyone else. And if something happens, if I'm not here or your mama needs help, you need to be able to take care of yourselves. Is something going to happen? I hope not. But hoping isn't planning. We plan for the worst and hope for the best. Martha watched these lessons with mixed emotions: pride that her children were learning valuable skills, fear that they needed to learn them at all, but she never interfered, trusting Ethan to know what was necessary. One evening in late February, as they sat by the fire after the children had gone to bed, Martha asked the question that had clearly been bothering her. What if we're wrong? What if James doesn't come back? What if he decided we're not worth the effort? Do you believe that? She was quiet for a moment. No, James doesn't give up. If anything, our getting married probably made him more determined, made it personal instead of just about blood rights. Then we keep preparing. Better to be ready for nothing than unprepared for something. And after we deal with James, assuming we can deal with him, what then? Do we just keep living this strange arrangement, married but not married, a family built on necessity instead of love? Ethan considered the question carefully. I don't know. Maybe we figure it out as we go. Maybe this arrangement becomes real in ways we didn't expect. Maybe we stay exactly as we are, partners in protection. Does it matter right now? I suppose not. Martha stared into the fire. I just wonder sometimes what happens when the crisis is over, when we're not united by fear anymore. Will we have anything else to build on? We have respect, shared purpose, daily life together. That's more than a lot of marriages start with. Is it enough? Ask me again in a year. Ethan smiled slightly. Right now, it feels like it might be. March came in like the proverbial lion, bringing storms that dumped fresh snow and wind that howled down from the mountains with renewed fury. But underneath the surface rage, there were signs of change. Days when the sun felt almost warm, nights when the cold wasn't quite as bitter. Winter's grip was loosening, slowly but surely. And with the loosening came growing tension. Everyone in the house felt it, the awareness that spring meant roads would open, that James would be able to reach them again. They prepared in different ways. Ethan stocked ammunition and made sure the property's defensible positions were clear. Martha rehearsed stories with the children, making sure they could articulate why they wanted to stay, why they were safe here. Sarah practiced with the rifle until she could hit a target with unsettling accuracy for a 9-year-old. The confrontation came in mid-April, when the snow had finally melted enough to make the road passable. Ethan was in the barn when he heard horses, multiple horses, which immediately set his nerves on edge. He grabbed the Winchester and moved to where he could see. 3 riders this time. James Hale in front, bigger and more menacing than Ethan remembered. Behind him, 2 men who had the look of hired muscle, hard faces, suspicious eyes, guns worn openly. They stopped in the yard with the confidence of people who expected to get what they wanted. Ethan stepped out of the barn, rifle held ready. From the house, he saw Martha appear in the doorway, her own rifle in hand. They'd planned for this, rehearsed it, but reality was always different from practice. "You again," James said, his voice carrying false pleasantness. "I did warn you I'd be back." "You did, and I warned you that you weren't welcome." "Yes, well, circumstances have changed," James gestured to his companions. "I have witnesses now, and legal documents." He pulled papers from his coat. "Signed by a judge in the territory, granting me custody of my brother's children on grounds of maternal unfitness and blood rights." "That's so? Well, I have documents too." Ethan kept his voice level. "Marriage certificate, signed and witnessed. Legal adoption papers for all 3 children, making them mine as much as Martha's. Your blood rights just got a lot more complicated." James's smile froze. "You married her?" 2 months ago. Reverend Michaels presided, all legal and proper. "And took my nieces and nephew as your own." James's voice went dangerously quiet. "That was remarkably stupid of you." "Was it? Because from where I stand it means your custody claim just became a custody battle. Mother and legal stepfather versus uncle. Want to guess how that usually plays out?" "You think papers will stop me?" James dismounted, his men following suit. "You think some marriage of convenience means anything?" "I think it means you can't just take those children, not without going through proper legal channels, not without proving Martha's actually unfit, which she isn't, not without showing you can provide better care, which you can't." Ethan raised the rifle slightly. "And I think it means you need to get off my property before this escalates into something nobody wants." Bold words for one man against 3. 2. Martha's voice cut through the tension. She'd moved onto the porch, her rifle aimed with surprising steadiness. 2 against 3, and there are 3 more guns in this house if we need them. My children know how to shoot, Mr. Hale, I made sure of it. James looked between them, calculation replacing bluster. You really want to do this? Make this a fight? You made it a fight when you followed us across territory and threatened my family. Martha's voice was harder than Ethan had ever heard it. I ran from Daniel because fighting him would have gotten me and my children killed. But I'm done running. You want them? You go through us. You go through the law, you do it right, or you don't do it at all. The law will side with blood. The law will side with stability and safety, with a 2-parent household on productive land versus a single man with a history of violence. Ethan took a step forward. Yeah, we know about your history, James. Took some asking around, but people remember you. Remember the fights, the threats, the woman in Ohio who pressed charges before you paid her off. You're not the upstanding citizen you pretend to be. James's face darkened with rage. You investigated me. Did my homework. Same as you should have before riding up here thinking intimidation would work. Ethan's voice stayed level. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your men and ride back wherever you came from. You're going to take your worthless custody papers with you, and you're going to leave my family alone. Or what? Or I file harassment charges, file for a restraining order, make your life legally complicated enough that continuing this becomes more trouble than it's worth. Ethan lowered the rifle slightly, trying for reason. Look, I get it. Daniel was your brother. Maybe you feel some obligation to his memory, but those children don't want to go with you. Their mother doesn't want to be near you, and forcing the issue won't change that. It'll just make everyone miserable and probably land you in jail. They're my blood. Blood doesn't give you ownership of people. Martha's voice cut through James's protest. I was married to your brother for 10 years. 10 years of walking on eggshells, of making excuses for bruises, of teaching my children to be invisible so they wouldn't anger him. I won't put them through that again. Not for blood, not for family, not for anything. I'm not Daniel. You're exactly like Daniel. Meaner, maybe, but the same underneath. You want control, not family. You want things to belong to you, not to care for them. Martha's hands were shaking, but her aim stayed true. The answer is no. Has been no. Will always be no. Find some other way to honor your brother's memory besides terrorizing his widow and orphaning his children. For a long moment, everyone stood frozen in tableau, rifles raised, tension coiled tight enough to snap. Then one of James's men shifted uncomfortably. Boss, maybe we should reconsider. This ain't what you said it would be. Legal marriage and adoption changes things. Could get messy. James's jaw clenched. We're not leaving without... Yeah, we are. The second man was already moving toward his horse. I signed on for easy money, not fighting a family on their own land. That's how people end up dead or arrested. I'm out. Get back here. But the man was already mounting, his companion following suit. James watched them go with impotent fury, then turned that fury on Ethan and Martha. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Ethan's voice was flat, final. It's over because continuing costs you more than giving up. It's over because you don't actually care about those children. You care about winning, and you just lost. Accept it with whatever grace you can manage and move on. James stared at him with hatred so pure it was almost tangible. Then, without another word, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving the spring morning disturbed but intact. Ethan and Martha stood in the yard long after the riders disappeared, rifles still held ready, waiting for some other shoe to drop. But nothing came. Just birdsong resuming, the nervous whicker of livestock settling, the quiet that meant the crisis had passed. Finally, Martha lowered her rifle with hands that shook violently. Is it really over? I think so. Ethan moved to her side, gently taking the rifle before she dropped it. He's not stupid. He knows he can't win, not legally, and I don't think he cares enough to try anything illegal. Too much risk for what amounts to pride. What if you're wrong? Then we deal with it. But, Martha, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. You stood up to him. You didn't run, didn't back down. You claimed your right to choose your own life. That's huge. That's everything. Tears tracked down her face, but she was smiling too. I've never done that before. Never stood my ground with someone like him. You did today, and you were magnificent. The door burst open and 3 children spilled out, having watched the whole confrontation from the windows. They surrounded Martha in a tangle of arms and relief, all talking at once, all reassuring themselves she was really okay. Ethan stepped back, giving them space, watching this family he'd somehow acquired celebrate their victory. Sarah looked over at him, her face split by a rare, genuine smile. We did it. We actually did it. You did it, Ethan corrected. Your mama did it, all of you. I just provided backup. You provided more than that. Martha extracted herself from the children and moved to stand beside him. You gave us a place to stand, literal and otherwise. Without that, we'd still be running. Without you, I'd still be hiding. So we're even. They stood together in the warming spring sunlight, this strange assembled family, and let relief wash through them. It wasn't over permanently. James would nurse his wounds and his anger somewhere. But it was over for now. Over enough that they could breathe, could plan, could imagine a future beyond just surviving the next threat. The weeks that followed brought real spring. Snowmelt swelling the streams, green pushing through brown earth, livestock restless with seasonal energy. The ranch came alive in ways Ethan had forgotten it could, and with Martha and the children there to share it, every small rebirth felt magnified. Clara discovered the first wildflowers and brought them to her mother with joy that made Martha's eyes water. Thomas learned to collect eggs without breaking any, a triumph that earned genuine praise from everyone. Sarah helped Ethan with the spring planting, her questions about crop rotation and soil quality, showing a mind that would have been wasted in a household focused only on obedience. And Martha began to relax in ways Ethan hadn't seen before. The constant tension she carried eased. Her movements became less guarded. Her laugh came more frequently. She was still his wife in name only, still slept in her own room and maintained careful boundaries, but the walls between them were lower than they'd been. One evening in May, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in a sky that was finally fully dark again without the reflection of snow. I've been thinking, Martha said carefully, about what this is, this arrangement we've built. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. And I think it's become something more than we planned. Not a real marriage, maybe, not in all the traditional ways, but something real nonetheless. She looked at him in the darkness. You're a good father to them, better than Daniel ever was. They trust you, love you even, though they're still learning what that looks like from a man. They're good kids, easy to care about. And me? Am I easy to care about? The question hung between them, weighted with vulnerability Martha rarely showed. Ethan chose his words carefully. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You're practical and brave, and you make this house feel like a home. So yeah, you're easy to care about, easy to respect, easy to... He paused, searching for the right word. Easy to build a life alongside. But not easy to love. I didn't say that. He turned to face her fully. Martha, I don't know what this is between us. It started as practicality, protection, mutual benefit, but somewhere along the way it became something else, something I don't have a name for yet. Maybe love, maybe just deep partnership. Does it need a label? I suppose not. Martha was quiet for a moment. I was so certain I'd never trust a man again, never let anyone close. But you've been nothing but honest and kind and patient. You've given us safety without demanding anything in return. That's not something I know how to process. Then don't process it. Just accept it. Ethan reached out, taking her hand in his. We've got time. No more running. No more immediate threats. We can figure out what this is at whatever pace feels right. Martha's fingers curled around his, tentative but present. What if I never want a real marriage? What if this arrangement is all I can manage? Then that's what we have. I'm not going anywhere, Martha. Whether this stays exactly as it is or evolves into something different, I'm committed to it. To you. To those children. That's not contingent on romance or passion or any particular configuration of marriage. You're a strange man, Ethan Cole. I've been told that before. He smiled in the darkness. But I'm your strange man now, for better or worse. For better or worse, she echoed, and this time when she smiled back it reached her eyes. They sat that way for a long time, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead, two people who'd found each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances and built something solid from necessity and choice and the determination not to let fear win. Summer came in hot and bright, bringing work that kept everyone busy from dawn to dusk. The children thrived in the warmth and activity, Sarah becoming genuinely skilled at ranch tasks, Clara revealing unexpected talent with the garden, Thomas growing sturdier and less afraid with each passing day. And somewhere in the midst of daily routine and shared labor and meals at a table that was always full, Ethan and Martha found themselves building something that looked remarkably like an actual marriage. Not the romantic kind from stories, maybe, but something more durable, partnership based on trust, respect, and the knowledge that they'd faced down threats together and won. Martha still had her room, still maintained careful boundaries, but those boundaries became less rigid as weeks turned to months. A hand on Ethan's shoulder as she passed, a smile shared across the table. Conversations that lasted long into the evening about things that mattered and things that didn't. Small intimacies that added up to something bigger than either of them had planned. One night in August, with harvest approaching and the children asleep upstairs, Martha appeared at Ethan's door again. But this time, her expression was different, less uncertain, more determined. I've been thinking, she said without preamble, about this marriage, about us. All right, Ethan set down the book he'd been reading. I don't know if I can ever be a wife in all the ways that traditionally means. Daniel ruined that for me in ways I'm still understanding, but I think... She paused, gathering courage. I think I'd like to try. To be more than just partners in name. To see if this could become something real in all the ways that matter. Ethan stood slowly, crossing to where she stood in the doorway. You sure? Because there's no pressure, Martha. What we have now is enough. Maybe for you, but I've been half alive for so long, afraid to want anything beyond survival, and you've shown me that there's more available if I'm brave enough to reach for it. She met his eyes directly. So I'm reaching. If you'll have me, really have me, not just legally. I'll have you any way you're willing to be had. Ethan cupped her face gently. But we go at your pace. No expectations, no demands, just two people figuring it out together. Together, Martha agreed. I like the sound of that. When he kissed her, it was gentle and questioning, giving her room to pull back if she needed to. But she didn't pull back. Instead, she leaned in, her hands finding his shoulders, her mouth soft and tentative but present. It wasn't passionate or desperate. It was careful and real and full of possibility. When they finally pulled apart, Martha was crying quietly. I didn't think I could do that again. Didn't think I could let someone that close without panicking. You did, though. You were brave. We were brave, she corrected with a watery smile. Together. The autumn that followed felt like a golden time, warm and abundant and full of the quiet satisfaction that came from hard work rewarded. They brought in the harvest together, the whole family working side by side. Put up preserves and smoked meat, and prepared for another winter, this time not as strangers sheltering together, but as an actual unit. Sarah started talking about wanting to be a rancher when she grew up, managing land and livestock like Ethan. Clara discovered she could read the weather by watching the animals and became their unofficial forecaster. Thomas lost his last fears of loud noises and began following Ethan everywhere, a small shadow learning how to be a man from someone who showed him gentleness and strength weren't opposites. And Martha bloomed in ways that took Ethan's breath away. She laughed freely now, made jokes, sang while she worked. The hard edges fear had carved into her softened without disappearing, leaving someone who was both strong and open, scarred but healing. They never did consummate their marriage in the traditional sense. The intimacy Martha could manage and that Ethan needed turned out to be simpler and more profound. Sitting together in comfortable silence, working side by side on shared projects, raising 3 children who needed them both, building a life that mattered from the raw materials of necessity and choice. When the first snow fell in November, a year and a week after Martha and the children had first arrived, the whole family stood on the porch watching the white descend. Another winter? Sarah observed. You think it'll be as hard as last year? No, Ethan said with certainty. Last year we were strangers learning to trust each other. This year we're family. That makes everything easier. Even if Uncle James comes back? He won't. Martha's voice was firm. And if he does, we'll deal with it the same way we did before. Together. Thomas tugged on Ethan's hand. Pa, will you read us stories tonight? The one about the bear again? Ethan felt his throat tighten at the casual use of pa, the first time Thomas had used it without prompting or uncertainty. He looked at Martha, saw tears in her eyes that matched his own. Yeah, buddy, I'll read you stories, same as every night. Good. Thomas leaned against his leg with the total trust of the very young. I like when you read. Your voice makes the scary parts not so scary. They went inside together as the snow fell heavier, closing the door on the cold and gathering around the stove like they had countless times before. Ethan read while the children listened and Martha mended by lamplight, and everything felt exactly as it should be. This wasn't the life Ethan had imagined when he'd posted that crooked notice for a cook. It was messier, more complicated, far more challenging. But it was also richer, fuller, more meaningful than anything he could have planned. Winter had brought him Martha and 3 children who needed shelter. He'd offered them warmth and protection without expecting anything in return. And somehow, in the mathematics of generosity and necessity, they'd all found something none of them had been looking for. A family built not on blood or romance, but on choice, trust, and the determination to face whatever came together. Outside, the snow fell thick and steady, burying the world in white. But inside Hollow Ridge Ranch, a fire burned warm, and 5 people sat safe and content, bound together by something stronger than any storm. They'd all been broken in their own ways, by loss, by violence, by fear. But they'd found each other in the depths of winter and built something whole from their collective pieces. Not perfect, not traditional, but real and solid, and worth every risk they'd taken to protect it. And as Ethan read about bears and heroes and the triumph of courage over fear, he understood with complete certainty that he'd never be alone again. Not in the ways that mattered, not with Martha's steady presence beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, not with 3 children who called this place home, and him something very close to father. Winter could come and go, seasons could change, years could pass, but this family forged in crisis and tempered by choice, would endure.